What is real?
It's all in his mind.
How do you define real?
Purely psychosomatic. That boy needs therapy.
Beethoven had his critics too.
This is your life.
But it still hurts.
Stop trying to control everything and just let go.
I don't like the idea that I'm not in control of my life.
You know, we're living in a society.
That boy needs therapy.
We all do.
You know what divine intervention is?
It's your kids, Marty.
What's really going to bake your noodle later on is
They didn't stop to think they should.
What just happened here was a miracle.
We all wear masks, metaphorically speaking.
So what are you gonna do about it?
You gotta grow up
But how?
You have to let it all go to free your mind.
I'm scared.
That's a problem for future Homer. Man, I don't envy that guy.
Hi all, Nick here, and we have a bonus episode of Confessions of an Itchoholic. You thought we were done,
But there's more.
but I'm back
But there's still more.
with a little bit more content and just to have a bit of a yarn about a few things. So what I thought I'd do is a little yarn, sort of largely off the cuff, just about the process and a few little interesting things that may be fun to hear for anyone who has gone on this journey with me, like all 12 of you. And then about 10 minutes in, I'll do an official conclusion and then an epilogue, which I'd already written a while back. So you can skip forward the 10 minutes just to get to the extra content bit, if you like, which is about 15-20 minutes long. Or you can listen to me for a bit going meta, talking about talking. So with this first season, the reality is that I wrote a phenomenal amount of words in the manuscript. And a lot of the process of doing the audiobook has been removing things, editing, synthesizing, and whittling. I just wrote so much. For example, I wrote an introduction to Shedding Skin, the book, and it was over 10,000 words, and I didn't even include any of it in this podcast audiobook. I just scrapped the whole lot. You know the old saying that Michelangelo started with a big block of marble, and it was what he removed with precision that created his masterpiece, David. Yes, I just compared my podcast with the world's most famous 5-meter high Renaissance sculpture. These things are not different. I mean, look, it took him 3 or 4 years, and it seems to have taken me that long too. The big question is, was Michelangelo coaching his kids' soccer team at the same time? Was he catching COVID and the flu and having surgery and shit? I don't think so. No, he wasn't, was he? Anyway, so I've included a few snippets of the intro in this episode. I think they're funny and they work as a little bit before the epilogue. You may not agree, but anyway, here we are. A couple of interesting things about the process of creating this. I do an ungodly amount of audio editing. And something funny I wanted to share was that, and you may or may not have noticed, is that I actually edit out my breath sounds. So my thinking was, in a podcast conversation, you'll hear breathing, like if someone's being interviewed. But in an audiobook, which I listen to a lot of, you won't. Now, I don't know if they edit out breaths on audiobooks or if the narrators speak in chunks without breathing. I do know that when Sam Harris recorded his book, I think it was his Waking Up book, which is actually pretty good. He said that he had to practice speaking without breathing, and so he probably just spoke in chunks, and they used those without having to edit all of his breaths. So that was pretty funny because that's something that I find hard to do. Anyway, I thought that was good for a bit of a laugh because, yeah, I really set myself up for an incredibly long editing process by deciding to do that at the beginning. Another thing, I recorded some of this content last year, if you can believe it. And then I wedged myself into a schedule to quickly get the rest out in the last kind of 6 to 8 weeks. So you might have noticed there were less clips and movie quotes, etc. in the last couple of episodes. I was just really struggling to find the time. Also, I was recovering from RSV at one point, and I had a broken rib. So my voice doesn't quite sound the same consistently throughout because I wasn't 100% well. This is something I really notice when I'm listening to audiobooks, when the narrator's voice changes a bit and it interrupts my connection with the story. Anyway, that's just a funny and stupid bugbear that I have. It's funny to me because I actually had major surgery at the end of last year on my upper respiratory. So the continuity of my voice, depth and sound was a little bit out of my control. So, sorry about that if that annoyed you as much as it would have me. Speaking of going meta, you may have noticed, or you may not have, that by doing the podcast, I am doing one of the things that I speak about in the podcast that I discovered was important and valuable. i.e. finding words to explain my experience, self-authoring, fighting alexithymia, synthesizing words and creativity and quotes and song lyrics into an expression of something, and then doing the next thing, which is like sharing it. So putting it out there to be seen and judged, which is really the opposite of hiding or being afraid or being conspicuous. So yeah, that's been an interesting thing. I try not to look at metrics or anything like that, but yeah, like the podcast has been listened to in 26 different countries. It's not easy to tell if someone in sort of Vietnam might have clicked on the link, listened for 2 seconds to my voice.
I don't know you. Who is this?
And then quickly hit stop and moved on to doing something else.
Prank caller! Prank caller!
That's entirely possible. So what I tried to do is to not make this trauma porn or like a real slog to get through as if I'm just complaining about the things that went bad in my life. It's an attempt to explore, my mental development through the lens of mainly like challenge and big change. I found that challenge has forged me more, especially for the first few decades, than just positive events. But there have been positive events, and it's sort of any emphasis on the negative ones is really just because they loom larger as forces that shape me and as catalysts for me to self-reflect and self-improve. I genuinely don't feel hard done by, and I don't really feel like my life is special or different. It's unique to me, but I don't ever get to experience it from anyone else's point of view, and I think that all of our lives are super unique. But I'm telling it with a real sense of the question, is this worthwhile to share, given that it's not unusual or revelatory as far as just the story of a single human goes? But with the guiding idea that all of our stories are pretty incredible and worth sharing and exploring, because I truly do believe that. I'm interested in people's stories, and I found much solace, heartbreak, and inspiration from reading or listening to the stories of other people. I really do think that any one person's life could be a podcast season. The fact that mine now is interesting, strange, and pretty funny. If I had to point to anything that I perhaps got wrong here or could have done better, it would maybe be that the content tries perhaps to do too much. It's got a lot going on and it's not really easy to classify, like it's perhaps not very targeted. Yeah, I don't know. Do people who want to listen to content about psychedelics really want to hear about chronic health challenges? Or do people with eczema who might relate to my journey of itchy skin and obsessions really want to hear about drug experiences or paranoia? Obviously, I don't know. So I mashed it all together and, it's definitely something. Like I'd written this thing, it was longlisted for a National Literary Prize in Australia, which really shocked me, but gave me a big kick to keep moving with it. And then I sort of realized it would just sit there. It wouldn't be anything if I didn't self-publish it in this way. So that's what this has been, self-publishing, but in a slightly different mode, like an audiobook/podcast crossover. So as I said, the content, perhaps tries to do a little bit too much. It may not be appealing to some people to have an hour of quickly spoken wall of words cross-threading multiple themes. But the idea is that perhaps something will land with someone, something will get through. So yeah, if you've gotten something out of this, now that I'm kind of wrapping up this season, yeah, feel free to reach out to me. I'd love to hear the bits that got through to you, if any, or the bits that didn't. And I might have mentioned in another intro, I'm writing another book, so that's exciting. And my thinking about that is, so there'll probably be less podcast content just for a little bit, hopefully still some, but more regular writing, because it's been a little while since I've been writing. And then if I can't get that book published, which is probably likely that won't happen, then perfect. I'll just do a second season of Shedding Skin podcast. If you're interested, my new book is about the brain and drugs and idiocy. Excellent. So just a quick word on parenting and how it sort of relates to all of this. Obviously, I talk about parenting a fair bit in this season. I see a lot of parents being selfish, and I struggle with that. I try not to judge them. I don't know what their life is like. And I am still selfish in many ways too, and I do grapple with that. But so I did go through a pretty radical transformation that shifted my understanding of my life as a cog in the chain of humans. But the parenting has given me a really positive orientation towards the world once I kind of was able to get out of my own way, in a sense. So I still see the importance of self-actualization and self-awareness and self-growth and all the self stuff. But I actually see that more now as it adds a benefit to the collective rather than as a goal for the individual to strive for as a means in itself. So I am a progressive, politically speaking, because my take is that we can work to improve the lot for as large a number of people as possible, like, the human community in a sense. We're all connected and we all need personal connection. So self-understanding is vital to be able to do this with others, even our own children. Like, you would think it would be easy, natural to always care for your own children in exactly the ways that you want to, and exactly in good ways. But that doesn't appear to be true. It looks like there are infinite opportunities for us parents to screw this thing up badly. And I think that's because we're still working on our own stuff, and because we are time limited, and we're constantly making decisions that are trade-offs for our kids and the time and space that we give to them. So I think about this stuff all the time, probably to my detriment sometimes, but hopefully to my kids' benefit. That's the idea. I feel like it's going to be hard to meaningfully contribute to a community if you are a wounded person. So I see that process of sorting out your shit as a bridge to then partaking in community, because, it's all about community. So this probably won't be the last episode this year. There are a few things percolating, but also the run into Christmas gets a bit mad. We're traveling interstate for family catch-ups, which is great. And then, just a few weeks off work. Summer in Brisbane, swimming, watching cricket, playing with the kids. I'm pretty excited about sort of having a break from the regular programming. Okay, that's about 10 minutes of yarning. So onto the content and wrapping up Confessions of an Itchoholic. Introduction snippets. There is an episode of the now famed ABC Kids cartoon Bluey called Shadowlands, where the show's animated puppies play a game involving their traversing a lush green parkland by only stepping in the shadows cast by the surrounding objects. When I watched this episode with my 2 young boys, I realised with some amount of shock that I have been playing Shadowlands for my entire adult life. You see, ostensibly I'm white-skinned, my ancestors being British and Irish, but it would be more apt to call me transparent-skinned. My largely see-through epidermis layer has really no ability to hold a modicum of tan because I'm effectively allergic to sunlight like some sort of modern-day vampire.
So you want me to tell you the story of my life?
Minus the Brad Pitt looks
I'll tell you my story.
and the blood-sucking and living forever.
I'm flesh and blood, but not human.
Living in subtropical Brisbane in Australia, its beating sun creating caustic UV conditions for 9 or more months a year, I can often be seen nervously scanning the outdoors scene ahead, looking to maximise my shade percentage, fretfully crossing the street in search of shelter, whilst running frantic calculations in my head about how much cumulative ultraviolet light exposure I had received, knowing as little as 10 minutes or more could leave my skin a hot broiling mess for days. As I watched this shadow game played innocently by a group of talking animated dogs.
Goodbye, Buttermilk. You're so beautiful.
From my vantage point on our slightly stained couch in the Gap in Brisbane, with my 2 sons sitting next to me, I wondered if these internal mental stories I carried were justified reactions to the world that I inhabit. Because I appear to live on a planet where the very air I breathe is often an allergen, full of pollen, dust, smoke, exhaust fumes, and the wafting stench of your peanut butter sandwich. The very water I drink and bathe in, that existence-sustaining H2O so often full of chlorine, bacteria, and microplastics, can cause inflammation and skin rashes. And the food that I eat, the very life-giving nutrition required to fuel my body, can be full of contaminants and more allergens. I am literally allergic, a child of the sun, born on Earth, of all places, to the very light that sustains the entire planet, for God's sake. As an air-breathing, water-drinking, food-eating, and sun-created organism, this sets the scene for a less than merry dance across the plains of my life. Where can refuge be found when encased in oversensitive skin that's allergic to UV, heat, sunscreen, and your disgusting couch where your cat has been licking its ass? It was actor Eric Bana playing Mark Brandon Reed in the 2000 film Chopper who said, quote, "Just because I'm being paranoid
Doesn't mean people aren't trying to kill me, Jim.
End quote. It was Nick Gilpin from The Gap in Brisbane just now who said, quote, "Just because I'm a hypochondriac doesn't mean I'm not fucking sick all the time," end quote. So some of this weird dysmorphic disconnect between my mind and my body has contributed to my long-held sense that I am perhaps an impossibly improbable creature. The unlikelihood that I would be here, on this earth, having the exact experience that constitutes my life has oftentimes felt very implausible, that defied any sort of solid, graspable understanding or meaning. This precariousness pushed me ever towards an attempted philosophical understanding of my consciousness and what it means to be a human being. But I'm not a philosopher, or an intellectual, nor a psychologist. I've been left to figure out what I am, this particular person, minus any formal qualifications to do so. Not that they would necessarily deliver the answers that I want. When they taught human in high school, I was definitely off sick that day. As Tom York sang, quote, "What the hell am I doing here?" End quote. Socrates said, quote, "To know thyself is the beginning of wisdom," end quote. Sounds great, sign me up. But then Alan Watts said, quote, "Trying to define yourself is like trying to bite your own teeth," end quote. This frequent wading through the quagmire of my own cerebral topology in search of some solid ground to perch myself speaks to the depth of my struggle to create and maintain a sense of legitimacy regarding my identity. A good example of this is my mighty struggle over the years to write even the most basic social media bio about myself, or my terror over the years of the "tell us a little bit about yourself" interview questions, or my horror at the thought of an elevator pitch, or my general disdain for everything that is on LinkedIn. Thank the cosmos that I met my wife of 14 years at an actual live and analog event, my own 23rd birthday party, which I covered in an earlier episode, back before we all carried the sum of the world's dating prospects in our pockets, sparing me the nightmare of ever having to complete an online dating profile. There are quite a few reasons that I wish to remain married to my wife, but avoiding ever having to fill out an OkCupid About You form would probably be in the top 5. It might look something like this. Have you been looking to get your body close to an organism that cannot regulate its own temperature? Hoping to pair bond to ensure the survival of your genetic material in the form of offspring, even with the understanding that certain feelings of love and lust that you may or may not feel with the person you copulate with will most likely crash faster than your crypto investments, leaving you for decades raising descendants with a creature who can't cook, doesn't like sudden noises, and gets exhausted taking the bins out each Sunday? Would you be at ease partnering with an oxygen-breathing, hairless man-child who often runs out of said oxygen mid-sentence? His inability to modulate his engorged respiratory system, creating crippling self-reflective tendencies that generate a feedback loop of conspicuousness, often leaving him paralysed and blank-faced whilst halfway through explaining what he got up to on the weekend. Would you be excited at the chance to develop a deep social connection with an entity that regularly questions its own existence, where any conversation, no matter how routine, could always terminate in shrugged shoulders and frustrating existential statements like, "How can we really know anything?" Then look no further. Nick is the upright hominid that you have been waiting for, in low demand, going cheap, available for an extended time. All right, settle down, ladies. I am spoken for. If a con man, which is an abbreviation for confidence man, is an egotistical and narcissistic person who artificially inflates their abilities and convinces you of them to some nefarious and self-glorifying end, then I am the exact opposite of that. I am anti-confident. In my 20s, I would often be teased by friends who would laugh at my inability to tell even the most banal of white lies. Okay, so maybe only a narcissist would be confident enough to speak about how they are definitely not a narcissist. Music quote. So take the photographs and still frames in your mind. Hang it on a shelf in good health and good time. tattoos of memories, and dead skin on trial. For what it's worth, it was worth all the while. It's something unpredictable, but in the end, it's right. I hope you had the time of your life." End quote. From the song Good Riddance, Time of Your Life, released by Green Day in 1997, sung by Billy Joe Armstrong. Epilogue 1. It feels slightly ironic, but perhaps cosmically perfect and somewhat obvious, that in order to heal some of my respiratory issues, I would practice breathwork. This makes sense when you hear that Thich Nhat Hanh said that, quote, "Our breathing is the link between our body and our mind," end quote. That in order to love my skin a little bit more, I would sometimes float in a vat of salty water. The same person who would scream in pain after ocean dips as a child. That a teen who struggled with obsessions, addictions, and paranoia, always looking to escape his regular waking life with altered or non-ordinary states of consciousness, would drink mushroom and cactus juice as a momentary reprieve from the burdens of his own mind, only to return to it more fully and calmly. And that a person who lived in the constant fear programming running in his mind would find his greatest release by facing those fears and slowly walking out from under their shadow. There's that quote that we're all climbing out from underneath something. The same person who wrestled with the tyranny of his culture, the rules and certainty and the inflexibility of parents and schools and uncaring institutions, the capitalist system and formality in all its guises, would eventually be awed by the gratitude that he was loved by his parents, amazed that he had access to these systems and the opportunity they provided, and just generally astounded at the privilege that he is now, as an adult, largely free to create his own habits, rituals, and meaning. That is real privilege, one that is often squandered. The teenager who looked at religion and people of faith as semi-delusional would come to accept as a man that human belief systems and religions are tools, traditions, and processes that point to perhaps the same thing. That inherent in the very existence of life is the miracle we struggle but nevertheless attempt to find and understand. That we have a fundamental mystery at the heart of our existence. The astrological and planetary conditions in which such a body as mine could evolve and survive appear so infinitesimally rare that my mind, the very mind that requires the rare conditions to support the improbable body to exist in the first place, cannot compute such vastness. It's that vastness that slaps me across my 40-plus-year-old ever-graying bearded face. But it's that desire to compute it, to understand it, that constitutes my love and acceptance of the attempts of religion and philosophy to explain what we are. And on emotional connection, something that I struggled to feel during my childhood. I learnt that I don't get to treat my children poorly just because my health is having an off day. Else I risk their disconnection from me. This is akin to taking my suffering and spreading it around for others to deal with, which is what many people do all the time. I need to develop ways to process what is happening to me, self-reflect and self-regulate, and notice what type of state I'm in before entering the world. And I need to be able to reset this constantly 1,000 times a day. As necessary.
What day is this?
To take responsibility for my state over and over again.
Didn't we do this yesterday?
I need to do all of this with self-reflection and epistemic humility. That is, reminding myself I don't know what I'm doing and therefore hedging my certainty. It seems like we unconsciously place our deepest burdens, sickness, uncertainty, and the need for control, fear of loss, fear of embarrassment, our shame, and our existential dread, onto others. Like I see this happening in my local community, and also in the culture at large, say in the United States, and especially with young men. No one else can carry these burdens for us. They must be held inside and understood there, else they will project out onto the people that we love. The question is, can we face the music? Can we face our own music? The music of the significance of each of our lives. How little time we get.
This is your life, and it's ending 1 minute at a time.
And how much of an impact we have on others in good ways and bad. And the big one, the realization that I had othered my own body, but that the long journey back to it would be necessary to find self-acceptance. The soul needs a body. I had to find mine again, to dance with it imperfectly and awkwardly, like at a high school breakup party. I can walk a path of healing myself whilst understanding I'm not really curing anything per se, and I can seek wellness without bashing myself over the head in the pursuit of perfection. It's possible to be more comfortable within myself while still being frequently physically uncomfortable and ill. It turns out the very dysfunctional nervous system I continuously tried to escape is the main ingredient required to gain access to some sort of divine state of immense gratitude and acceptance. I just needed not to be at war with it, but instead to dance. Easier said than done. I just needed to shed enough restricting skin to feel it. And the further illumination that my own unique and weird pain and the suffering that it brought is actually not unique at all. It's specific to me, but the burden of suffering is built into the human condition, and all others around me are walking the same path as I am, trying to hold their own existential burdens, often reaching for drugs and alcohol or whatever to escape themselves, just as I did. It is really quite a big one, like to witness others walking their metaphorical paths and know that I don't know what that is like for them. Like they are out there doing their thing and I just send them love. Who knew that the ultimate boss battle of the video game of my life would be fought against me? My own addictions, my own limited way of seeing myself. The battle wasn't out there, it was in here. The mundane, repetitious, veneer-created, ordinary life that you are so familiar with and so bored with is just one revelatory experience, one frame-breaking experience, one tragedy away from being revealed to you what it was all along. Extraordinary, unfathomably complex, and deeply mysterious. Nothing is normal, boring, the same, except your sense of it, a sense that can be taken away by experiences often thrust upon us: death, birth, illness, collapse. Figuring out all of these things invoked in me a transformation the likes of which I could never have imagined was even possible. However, Joseph Campbell, speaking to this very human process of waking up to ourselves, really nails the ordinariness of such a personal and internal revolution. Quote, "And looking back at what had promised to be our own unique, unpredictable, and dangerous adventure, all we find in the end is such a series of standard metamorphoses as men and women have undergone in every quarter of the world, in all recorded centuries, and under every odd disguise of civilization." End quote. Miracles. Some people speak of miracles, if they believe in them at all, as singular events of a higher, deeper, or like magical purpose.
You know what divine intervention is?
Or, as Samuel Jackson playing Jules Winfield from Pulp Fiction called it,
What just happened here was a miracle.
divine intervention, when, quote, God came down from heaven
And stop these bullets.
end quote. But what a blessed miracle indeed to be a carbon-based, oxygen-breathing, upright hominid animated by a complex network of neurons, firing electricity through my being so as to feed back to me the physical reality that I exist in, living my short, amusing, and calamitous life on a small, nondescript blue planet floating in the outer section of one of a billion galaxies. Would we be able to see a miracle if it began before we were born and will continue long after we are gone, if, in fact, we were living inside it? It's the same miracle I sense when I gaze into the eyes of my children, their preciousness, mortality, beauty, and fragility, reason enough for me to continue evolving and shedding the skin of my previous selves. The vibration of the universe, like the melodic pulsations of a 90s rock song, playing out on the instrument of one man's ruinous nervous system as he tries and fails and tries again to tune it towards betterness, facing his music, seeking his most harmonious frequency. Music quote. Do you know what the time is? Is it messing with your mind, kid? Are you hurting all the time and you need a pacifier? Come on, let's take a look outside. End quote. From the song Pacifier by Shehad, released in 1999 and sung by John Toogood. Epilogue Part 2. My second son, Walter, the big domed bruiser whose birth I mentioned in the first episode of this podcast, ended up being more of a Matryoshka doll than I would have hoped. It turns out he's a chip off the old block and has asthma, allergies, and you guessed it, eczema. So the final words of this first season of Shedding Skin are dedicated to him. Whatever the biological or environmental conditions that impacted me have been in some way passed onto him. The pattern of autoimmunity radiating outwards like DNA ripples in a genetic pond. Walt will have to learn to make sense of his afflictions and their impact on his life for himself. No one else can do that for him. I can, however, hope to use my experience to guide him where possible to that place of self-acceptance as opposed to self-disgust, and self-love as opposed to self-hatred, as he walks his path through the medical borderlands of chronic health ailments. I can see no more purposeful undertaking for my life than to use my experience of falling deep into, then emerging out of, those feelings of deficiency and shame and the patterns of addiction they created to help guide him and his older brother to an adulthood where self-acceptance and self-love is a core tenet of their being, where he can reside in his body, whatever challenging state it may be in, and find some acceptance there to learn to hold it, dance with it, and even love it. And when things get hard, when old coping tools no longer work, when patterns of mind and his own neuro-rigidity needs to be eased, to show him how to ease them, to shed the superfluous or controlling parts of himself, to process the hurt and the pain and the loss and the challenge of being a person so that he can find gratitude for his life once more.